They are waiting for you to scream, to cry, or to defend yourself. They are waiting for that surge of adrenaline to confirm that they still own your emotional landscape. Here is the truth. As long as you are trying to get even, you are still dancing to their tune. Want to see the person who believes they are the center of the universe lose their grip? You don't do it by fighting back with more fire. You do it by becoming the most boring, predictable, and indifferent person they have ever encountered. We've been conditioned to think that if we are hurt, we must explain it. If we are wronged, we must fight for justice. But with a person who lacks empathy, an explanation is just more information for them to use against you. And a fight is just more fuel for their ego. The fundamental mistake many people make when dealing with a narcissist is believing that the goal should be to torture or win against them. This mindset is a trap because it keeps you tethered to their cycle of dysfunction. If you are actively seeking ways to annoy, punish, or retaliate against them, you are still heavily invested in their emotional world. You are effectively handing them the remote control to your nervous system. By focusing your energy on how to make them feel the pain they have caused you, you are continuing to provide the very thing they crave most, your attention. Narcissists at their core are bottomless pits of need. They require constant external validation, whether positive or negative, to sustain their fragile sense of self. They do not care if you hate them or love them, as long as you are preoccupied with them. When you make it your mission to hurt them, you are proving that they still have power over your thoughts and feelings. The true path to liberation lies not in combat, but in complete and total indifference. Indifference is the ultimate starvation for a person whose existence depends on being the protagonist of your life. When you reach a state where their actions no longer trigger a defensive, angry, or emotional reaction, you are effectively stripping them of their fuel source. You cease to be a source of supply and instead become a non-entity. This is profoundly unsettling for them, as it forces them to confront the vacuum of their own personality without your reactions to mask it. By choosing to prioritize your own peace and emotional regulation over their reaction, you reclaim your internal energy, finally stepping off the stage of their drama and into a life where your worth is entirely independent of their approval or their suffering. The gray rock method is not a strategy designed to punish someone else, but a strategic survival mechanism designed to protect your own sanity. When you engage with a person who lacks empathy, you are often expected to provide a dynamic, reactive performance. They want your shock, your tears, your anger, or your frantic attempts to defend your character, as all of these reactions serve as the emotional currency they need to feel powerful and validated. To become a gray rock is to intentionally strip away the performance. You make yourself as dull, uninteresting, and unresponsive as a common stone on the ground. When they bait you with a criticism or a dramatic accusation, you do not launch into an explanation or a passionate rebuttal. Instead, you offer the bare minimum: a neutral facial expression, a low energy acknowledgement, and a lack of emotional investment. You respond with phrases like, "I hear you," or "That is an interesting perspective," and then you disengage. By consistently failing to provide the emotional roller coaster they are hunting for, you become a boring target. They will eventually look for a more reactive audience because you are no longer feeding their hunger for control. This is not about being cruel. It is about becoming invisible to their manipulative maneuvers. When you stop providing the spikes of excitement or frustration they rely on, they lose their leverage over your mood. It forces them to look elsewhere for their fix. The beauty of this approach is that it requires almost no effort on your part. You are simply opting out of the conflict loop. By refusing to be the vibrant, reactive source they desire, you create a buffer zone that allows you to exist in their presence without becoming consumed by their chaotic agendas. Silence is often misinterpreted as passive, but when dealing with a manipulative individual, it is actually one of the most formidable boundaries you can set. To someone who thrives on controlling the narrative, silence is an act of defiance because it directly denies them the audience they believe they are owed. When you choose not to speak, you are withholding the permission they feel they have to direct your thoughts and influence your reality. They will frequently attempt to weaponize your silence, interpreting it as an insult or a personal attack, because they cannot comprehend an interaction where their voice is not the loudest or most dominant force. They expect you to fill the silence with justifications, explanations, or pleas for understanding, as these are the tools they use to maintain their position of superiority and keep you engaged in their game. When you remain silent instead, you refuse to validate their perspective or participate in the distortion of events they are trying to construct. You are not just closing your mouth. You are closing the door on their ability to gaslight or manipulate your perception of yourself. This is deeply unsettling for them because it removes their ability to project their insecurities onto you. They rely on your verbal participation to sustain their false reality. And when that participation is removed, they are left to confront the reality of their own actions without your help to rationalize them. By holding your ground in the quiet, you signal that you are no longer willing to be a character in their script. You are effectively reclaiming your sovereignty, demonstrating that your peace of mind is far more valuable than any conversation they could possibly initiate, and proving that they no longer hold the keys to your emotional expression. The urge to defend, explain, or justify ourselves is a natural human response when we feel misunderstood or unfairly attacked. But when dealing with a manipulative person, this instinct becomes a tactical liability. They do not ask for explanations to achieve clarity or resolution. They solicit them to identify the cracks in your armor. Every time you attempt to explain your motives or justify your actions, you are essentially providing them with a blueprint of your vulnerabilities, which they will inevitably twist and use against you. They will take your defense and reframe it as weakness, shifting the goalposts until you are trapped in an endless cycle of apologetics. The JADE technique, which stands for don't justify, argue, defend, or explain, is the antidote to this trap. By refusing to engage in this exhausting theater, you break the tether of the drama loop. When you stop providing the data they need to keep the conflict alive, the conversation loses its purpose for them. You are no longer participating in the gaslighting or the circular arguments because you are not playing the role of the defendant in their manufactured trial. This shift requires immense discipline, as it feels counterintuitive to remain silent when you are being misrepresented or provoked. However, once you embrace this boundary, you stop granting them the power to dictate your reality. You are no longer seeking their approval or trying to convince them of your worthiness, and in doing so, you deprive them of the emotional fuel they need to maintain their control. When you stop justifying your existence to someone who has no intention of understanding you, you effectively starve their ability to create drama, allowing you to move through the world with a sense of clarity and autonomy that is entirely independent of their chaotic agenda. If you're tired of the constant emotional whiplash and are finally ready to stop feeding the beast, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We are doing the deep, uncomfortable work of unpacking these patterns every week. And if you're ready to start building a life where you are the focus, not them, you're in the right place. Validation is the currency that fuels the narcissist's internal world, and they treat it as an absolute necessity for their survival. They construct their persona based on the external feedback they receive, relying heavily on others to act as a mirror that reflects their perceived brilliance, superiority, or victimhood. By withholding this validation, you are essentially cutting off the primary resource they use to construct their fragile reality. This does not mean you have to be overtly unkind or hostile. Rather, it means you stop being the automatic source of praise, reassurance, and agreement that they have come to expect. When they fish for compliments, seek validation for their inflated claims, or demand that you support their distorted versions of events, you simply remain neutral and disengaged. You refuse to offer the ego strokes they desperately crave, which creates a profound void in their experience of the interaction. Because they lack a stable internal sense of self, they feel this withdrawal as a direct threat to their stability. They will likely ramp up their efforts to extract your approval, perhaps through intense flattery, dramatic displays, or guilt tripping. But maintaining your boundary is essential. You are not obligated to prop up their ego, and you are certainly not responsible for the discomfort they feel when they are not receiving the constant adulation they think they deserve. By choosing to keep your praise and your validation for yourself, or for those who have actually earned it through genuine connection and empathy, you stop participating in their delusion. You effectively starve the beast, forcing them to confront the emptiness they feel without your help. And in the process, you reclaim your own agency, ensuring that your approval is a gift you choose to give, not a tax you are forced to pay. The cornerstone of a manipulative individual's strategy is the baiting of your emotions. They rely on the fact that most people have a natural inclination to be heard and understood, especially when they are being accused of things they did not do or being treated with blatant disrespect. When a narcissist gaslights you, they are explicitly hoping to provoke a reaction, a surge of anger, a defensive explanation, or a breakdown, because that emotional explosion provides them with the proof they need that they are in control of your state of mind. Maintaining logical detachment is your most effective shield against this exploitation. When you remain strictly factual and refrain from injecting emotion into the conversation, you render their attempts at provocation transparent. Instead of reacting to their inflammatory words with passion, you respond with simple, objective observations. You strip the conversation of its theatrical value, focusing entirely on the logistics or the facts at hand. When you refuse to get sucked into the emotional weeds, their efforts to create a dramatic scene fall flat, making their behavior look increasingly erratic and disconnected from reality. This calm, detached demeanor does not just protect your energy. It forces them to confront the fact that they can no longer influence your internal state. It is an act of extreme self-discipline that effectively turns the tables by exposing their tactics for what they truly are. When you refuse to be baited, you reclaim your power, demonstrating that you are an autonomous individual who cannot be triggered or managed. This distance allows you to observe their games without becoming a participant, effectively neutralizing their ability to dominate your thoughts and ensuring that your peace remains intact, regardless of their attempts to destabilize you. When you finally stop playing the game and begin to set firm boundaries, you must be prepared for the inevitable backlash. This is a critical stage that often catches people off guard because they assume that being reasonable or distant will naturally lead to a reduction in conflict. In reality, the moment you cease to provide the emotional fuel or validation that a narcissistic person relies on, they will rarely simply walk away or accept your new terms. Instead, they will perceive your withdrawal as an act of rebellion, and will likely launch a campaign to regain control. This process almost always begins with hoovering, where they attempt to suck you back into the dynamic. They may use extreme love bombing, feign a crisis, or dangle promises of change to trigger your empathy and lure you back into the familiar cycle. If that fails, the tactic often shifts toward escalation. You may face increased rage, smear campaigns, or even more overt attempts to provoke a reaction. Many people mistake this escalation as a sign that their boundaries are not working, but the opposite is true. This reaction is evidence that your boundaries are working effectively. They are panicking because they are losing their grip on their primary source of influence. If you break your boundary during this phase to keep the peace, or because you are exhausted by their intensity, you reinforce the idea that their manipulation eventually pays off. Understanding that this escalation is a predictable part of the process allows you to remain steady rather than reactive. By anticipating their need to escalate and holding your ground through the storm, you demonstrate that your new reality is not a temporary whim, but a permanent standard. This perseverance is exactly what eventually forces them to stop looking to you as a reliable source of supply. The most profound irony in navigating relationships with highly manipulative individuals is the amount of energy we often expend trying to teach them, change them, or quote unquote win the interaction. We analyze their every move, plot our responses, and spend countless hours ruminating on how to outsmart their games. Yet, every moment spent focusing on their next move is a moment of your life that they are still successfully stealing. When you dedicate your mental bandwidth to planning ways to annoy or neutralize them, you are still existing within their orbit. The goal is not to be a better player at their game, but to stop playing entirely. True victory is not achieved through their frustration. It is achieved through your own detachment and growth. Every ounce of energy you reclaim from the obsession with them is energy you can finally invest in your own projects, your self-care, and your genuine connections. Think of the psychological space they have occupied in your mind as a house they have squatted in. The only way to truly evict them is to stop paying the, quote, rent of your attention, your worry, and your reactions. When you shift your focus inward, you stop being a supporting character in their tragedy and become the protagonist of your own life. It is not about proving something to them because they are fundamentally incapable of acknowledging your humanity in the way you need. It is about proving to yourself that your inner peace is worth more than any outcome involving them. When you finally reach a point where their actions, their opinions, and their games are no longer a factor in your daily happiness, you have achieved the only form of winning that actually matters. You are not just surviving, you are thriving in the silence that follows their departure from your primary focus. The journey toward reclaiming your life from a toxic dynamic is not found in the satisfaction of quote-unquote winning or the temporary pleasure of watching them react. It is found in the quiet, steady reclamation of your own energy. For too long, you have been the fuel for someone else's engine, the mirror for their fragile ego, and the target for their manufactured drama. But the moment you decide to stop providing the reactions they crave, the power balance shifts permanently. Whether you are using the gray rock method, maintaining logical detachment, or simply choosing the power of silence, remember that your goal is not to change them. It is to change your relationship with them. You are not their therapist, their teacher, or their audience. You are a person entitled to peace, autonomy, and an environment free from the constant need to justify your own existence. Do not be discouraged when the storm rises. That intensity is simply the last-ditch effort of someone realizing their control is dissolving. Hold your ground, keep your focus on your own growth, and recognize that the greatest punishment you could ever inflict on a narcissist is to become completely uninterested in their games. When you stop looking at them, you stop feeding them. When you stop feeding them, you finally set yourself free. Step out of the cycle, reclaim the space in your mind they have occupied for far too long, and start building a life where your well-being is the only thing that matters. You have the power to close the door, walk away, and never look back. And that is the ultimate victory.